Okay, who do we have here? What's your name?
Camden.
Camden. How long have we known each other?
Kindergarten, so I was like 5. We were then.
Yeah, so like 13 years, give or take. It's
Yeah.
it's it's been a while. And you're also, graduating senior at high school, correct?
Yep.
Yep, choosing the college. It's fun. So we have some information related to the Ivy League. So one thing I want to point out is that the Ivy Leagues, they're very prestigious. But one thing that comes with that is that the average household income for these Ivy Leagues is like $200,000, which is way over the median of 70,000. And because this is so much that there's a lot of disparities where two-thirds of the students that attend the Ivy Leagues do make a lot of money, while only the bottom 10% are from low income. With this disparity, do you agree that that's like pretty unfair?
Mm,
Because it
for the most
makes.
part, yes.
Yes, for the most part. And do you want to elaborate more on that a bit?
I would say to certain degrees it is true that that is accurate because some people work very hard and aren't able to get into them because of money.
Mm-hmm.
But it is also it's kind of like it wouldn't like some of the parents worked very hard and didn't go to a prestigious college and now have made a lot of money to help their kids get into more prestigious colleges. So it's kind of like it sucks for the current kids, but some of the parents who worked really hard to have money to like put their kids into a more prestigious college deserve for their kids to go there.
Okay, that's a fair point. There's no real solving it because, yeah, you can't let everyone in, and that is the problem.
Yeah, there's no way to like completely solve it.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to say is the reason they let wealthy people is because they want them to give back to the universities. Like Harvard has a $50 billion endowment fund. But what do you think about it being the Ivy League's main job to just grow the endowment funds and have billions of dollars?
Um, can you repeat that again? Just so I can
Yeah,
like
yeah. So the main goal of the Ivy Leagues is to raise as much money as possible, and they have these endowment funds that are worth billions of dollars. Like Harvard's endowment fund is the largest at $51 billion, and that's why they want to get these high-income students. What do you think about that?
I feel like part of it is like what's the word for it? It's like a financial class segregation a little bit,
Yeah.
which is definitely like bypassable to a certain degree, but it holds strong and it's not easy to break that.
Mm-hmm. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, Ivy Leagues are pretty big on diversity, right? They use it as part of their admission process, and if you've heard the recent thing with affirmative action, that it's actually banned and you can't use race as a hiring point to like get into some of the Ivy Leagues. And with this said, is that the Ivy Leagues aren't that diverse. It shows. Most of the thing they have under like Hispanic and African American, but the thing that they have higher is actually Asian Americans. But one thing that was found out was that there was a case that was Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard. And a case that made it up to the Supreme Court was that they reviewed statistics that showed that Asians should actually be admitted at twice the higher rate, even though they are already like way higher than the average nationwide. It should still be even higher. So they went against Harvard, and they basically went after the fact that affirmative action violated the Fourth Amendment. Now, do you think it should be allowed that they should have more like Asian Americans, even though they were quoted as saying they don't admit them more because they're, quote, boring and uninteresting?
Um, I think it kind of depends because like there are certain situations where like that's kind of a stereotype.
Hmm.
with like them being boring and like not interesting,
Hmm.
which with some of them, because I feel like it's also like the different cultures of like different like races and like ethnicities. Because there's usually like the Asian American culture more so is like hard work, focus on good grades, and like go to good schools and like work your way up the ladder and like be super successful and like make lots of money, and that's like
Hmm.
what they consider success.
Yeah.
So sometimes because of that, like I feel like extracurriculars and like things that like more of like the arts and like the athletics sometimes get neglected by
Hmm.
those who focus so much on like the like things like debate, which are really good. Like those are things that like Ivy League schools love. Like the business honor societies, and like the people who do these aren't necessarily boring. It's just there's this stereotype with them that's carried as someone being boring.
Right, like it's the stereotype like if you're Asian, you gotta be like you're a failure, and that if you're not like a doctor, you're a failure,
Yeah,
and this can play a part into why they're so
it's
successful.
also because like certain cultures don't show as much emotion.
Hmm.
So that's another thing is like if you don't show emotion, you're considered, especially in like America, you're dull. Like
Hmm.
you're emotionless. Like you don't have character.
Hmm. Yeah, that's some great insight. The last thing I want to leave you on is like some high-ranking positions at these Ivy Leagues, like a Stanford president who was accused of committing academic fraud. And this basically happened because some of his studies, as everyone like that who's a professor does research, and basically had a falsification of data. But no one checked this data because he has such a high-ranking position. And so it was recently found out that this data was falsification, and he was then forced to resign. What do you think, like, about the high-ranking powers of Ivy Leagues? And
I feel like part of that isn't so much to do with high ranking because that happens at all schools. Like the professors, especially like the very smart professors, because usually the smarter someone is, like the more their ego gets in the way of things like that. Because I don't think that it was completely the guy's fault, and like he could have been at like let's say not like just like a college, not even a
yeah,
university,
yeah.
just like a small like local town college, and he could have done that, and like of course then he would have been checked. So it's just like because he's like so high up, like all the professors, especially like the really smart ones, all have like immense egos. So like they can convince themselves into thinking they're right.
Yeah, that's
So
really
through
true.
that, like because someone doesn't check, it's a little unfair to them for
Hmm.
like especially that guy like losing his job because no one checked him. It's just like because like yeah, he probably should have been a little more humble, but
Yeah.
it's also kind of like if you're at that point, there's usually going to be some ego because that's like in all industries. Like once you're at a certain point, you've got ego and like you're going to be confident in what you do, even if it's wrong.
Yeah, and that's some really good insight that this doesn't just happen at Ivy Leagues, it happens definitely across many colleges across the United States. But the main reason that this is pointed out is because it is like an Ivy League, and most people think that they should be held to a higher standard. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that all colleges should be held to equal
I feel like all
standards?
colleges should be held to a similar standard.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fair because they all are kind of similar. They both do. Oh, oh,
Cutting out staticky.
oh, oh. Okay. Yeah, that some colleges like specialize in things so that they'll be better. But that is true that maybe all colleges should be held to the same standard. And the
Yeah,
last thing I want to leave you on is another thing recently that happened is that Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT gave congressional.
you've cut out.
Gosh, gosh. Okay. Yeah. So recently, Harvard. Start this again. Recently, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, MIT gave congressional hearings about unfavorable opinions. So when they were asked questions like calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment, they responded with some things like it depends on the content. Of course, they don't want to lie under oath, but do you think this was a bit too much?
Mm, it's hard to say because you don't re- really know completely. Probably, I don't understand the situation fully with that. So, but it is hard because also like it's hard to know like what ethnicity the people that saying that were.
Yeah, they were all. They were. I think most of them were white, but I think the Harvard president was African American.
So
But I don't think they were Jewish.
yeah, and then part of that is like it kind of because I'm assuming none of them are Jewish with what they said.
Yeah, I don't think so.
That wouldn't make sense.
Hmm.
So, because it seems like a little bit of a not racist. It's um whatever like the racist version of religion for religion is.
Okay, yeah, I get what you mean. Maybe they just don't understand the other side of the argument,
Yeah.
and that's like could be why they said that. That is all we have for today, Camden. Thank you so much for your time, and have a good one. Oh, interview over. Okay, thank you so much, Camden. Okay, here we go. So what's your name, Mr. Sir?
I I'm Gavin.
Gavin. How long have we known each other?
Uh, since I think middle school or elementary.
Yeah, it's been a while, like a long time. So originally I have like the Ivy Leagues related to my ethnics class, and I want some good insight from you because like most people that I've done and interviewed, we're all going into college. It's a big decision. So the one thing I wanted to highlight in this interview is like some bad on the Ivy Leagues. This is just a bad because there's a lot of good, but it's like putting them in check. So the first thing I
Yeah.
want to start out with is, the Ivy Leagues, they are well known. The average household income for an Ivy League student that gets enrolled is $200,000. This is way over the median of $70,000. Through data that was obtained, the top two-thirds of students come from the top 20% income, while the bottom 20% only make 10% of students. So, what I'm trying to get through is that there is a lot of money in Ivy Leagues, and they want this money so that they can grow their endowment funds. The biggest one is at Harvard, they're at $51 billion, and the combined total is almost $200 billion, which is almost an unfathomable amount of money. With this much money to be considered, I wanted to ask you if, should endowment funds be allowed?
I mean, honestly, I don't really like the idea of just like having like endowments because it helps the rich people, not really like the poor, and kind of helps continue the cycle of keeping the rich rich. But that's me. Uh, and it is kind of a weird like mm, thing, so to say, because uh, you would think that with like certain types of economic structures, like what was something? Am I able to get political in this?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Okay. Um, Ronald Reagan, he was an actor, okay, not a president. He created trickle down economics, because he was told to, and like the idea that like the rich will want to spend money and it will trickle down to the poor, doesn't really happen because the rich are just constantly looking for tax cuts and are not going to have their wealth trickle down at all. Like, because why have 100 million when you could have a billion? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like that concept of it's kind of the more you have of something, the more you want more of it, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
which is especially glaring as an issue with money. And especially on large scales, it just doesn't feel real because you're not coming into actual contact with many of it.
Yeah.
You see it as numbers, and that's not what it really is, so to say.
Mm-hmm. That is some good insight. It's hard to say what should be happening, even though they are like private institutes. So some people think like, since they're not a public institute, that it should be allowed because there's different rules on the type of university.
And, on top of that, sorry, I went on a rant about rich people.
No, that's good.
Any donation of a property, honestly, like, you know that their child's getting into that college. Like,
Yeah.
it guarantees it, even if the child has, like, C's or D's in high school. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really quite reflect an actual, like, prestigious college.
Yeah. Big thing with that is that you can donate money. People say like you donate $1 billion, you get in. A big part of that is like legacy admissions, if they should be allowed, because many of these legacy admission people want to just go to the same school even though they don't like fit in the statistics. Like maybe say they have an 1100 SAT when the average is like 1500, but they're a legacy admission, so they get some special treatment.
Yeah. Me personally, I don't like that, but
Mm-hmm.
Ivy Leagues will be Ivy Leagues, and they will have alumni preference or legacy preference.
Yeah, it probably won't be going away. So, with the endowment funds in mind, another topic I want to go to is you probably heard of like affirmative action.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with affirmative action, this happened because of I think it was, let me find it. It was what was the name? It was Fair Admissions versus Harvard. Now, this was a case where data showed that Asian Americans should be admitted at twice the higher rates that they already were. Now, Asian Americans at Ivy Leagues are admitted around 24% when the average is like around 10%. Now, Ivy Leagues, they love to claim like that they have diversity hires, but really all they do is hire more Asian Americans and than the national average, while groups like African Americans and Hispanics are actually lower. Now, while this is a problem, is because the data on Asian Americans show that they should be admitted at twice higher rates. The reason they weren't is because that they were quoted as being uninteresting and boring. That they didn't really add much. So the outcome, I want to get your opinion on what the outcome is, because on the one case you have, if you can't let diversity be a hiring point in Ivy Leagues, you might see like these marginal groups that are already low, like African Americans and Hispanics, be hurt even more. Or you have on the other hand where you let like more Asian Americans in that should be let in. It's a hard situation. But I want what do you think about it?
Yeah, honestly, I remember hearing about that scandal. I think that at the point that we're at right now, I think that affirmative action is a good thing because it prevents bias, I guess, so to say, from like leaking into admissions to where they kind of have to at least meet a minimum like quota to give people at least some opportunity, which is kind of not a good reflection of society, but it is certainly like something that is important, if that makes sense. It's not like good, but it does do something good.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a hard case because there's no like win-win. It's like often we'll talk about like policy and that like policy will hurt both groups, but it's like which group do you want to hurt less? And I think that plays into this case where you could let the group that should get let in, but then it will hurt, the minority group. So it's really just a hard case. So the outcome right now is that affirmative action is still allowed in many states, not all of them. It's kind of by state cases. So you have big ones like California and Florida where affirmative action is banned, but you have all the Ivy Leagues and, Colorado that we're in. I think it's most states, I'm looking at the graph, I think it's like 40 states where the affirmative action is not banned. So that is the outcome right now.
So what generally, like, would you say it's more like the South and Midwest where it's like banned, or?
I can send you the graph, and then you can give me some thoughts on that.
Okay.
This is what it is currently. And this is like a pretty recent issue as well.
That actually kind of is surprising. It doesn't seem to be quite like a polar argument.
Yeah.
Or like political, so to say. Because, like Florida and California, very, like, opposite.
Very different.
Political spectrums. And they both banned it versus, like, Colorado and Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Also kind of political spectrums, they have it the same. Which kind of shows it's just kind of an interesting thing. It's tough because it's like a lose-lose situation if you get rid of it versus if you keep it. Because either way, there's going to be a group of people that's angry.
Yeah, it's easier. It's easier said than done. Like, you should just let more people in the Ivy Leagues, but then they don't keep their low acceptance rate. So the third topic I want to get on is academic fraud. So another recent event that happened was that the president of Harvard, president of University of Pennsylvania, and MIT gave congressional hearings about unfavorable opinions. The Harvard president was asked a question like calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment. And then the Harvard president responded, well, it depends on the context. Shortly soon after, the Harvard president was forced to step down because of this unfavorable opinion she gave. And another example is the Stanford president who is accused of committing academic fraud. Now, this happened because he is the president, it's the highest position you can get, so no one checks his data. Then, when they actually did, they showed that he has a falsification of data, and this went into a bunch of problems, and he was also forced to step down. The question I have for you is that now, at other less known universities, maybe like CSU, maybe this falsification of data is taken lighter, but because it's like Ivy Leagues that they're held to a higher standard. The question I have is that should all schools be held to the same standard, or should these Ivy Leagues be held to a higher standard because they are more prestigious?
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of neutral. You could make an argument for both sides. I know I'm not supposed to take the neutral stance.
No, that's good.
But I mean, I am leaning towards everyone should have kind of stricter academic checks, so to say. Because it kind of just shows integrity and kind of the commitment you're willing to put forward. Though I don't think it should be I don't think academic performance should be the only deciding factor in academic success or career success, if that makes sense. Because I feel like you should be able to, just like how you are with sports, where you're able to lower the GPA minimum to get into some colleges, you should be able to do that with other things I don't know, music and other extracurriculars.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it is really just a case-by-case basis. It depends where you think. You could be yeah, maybe this school has more money for research, so they should, be be treated differently because they have more funding. But if you're like at a music school, I don't think there's much research being done, or it's definitely less than like a STEM-based university.
Yeah. And, like, honestly, I do think that falsification of your academic, like, profile is like, kind of wrong, but I can kind of understand it with, like, pressures from, like, parents and stuff to, like,
Mhm.
get into, like, the dream college of an Ivy League or something.
Yeah, that's
It's
in.
just that. Wait,
Oh,
what?
you can go ahead. My bad.
Um, it's just at the same time, it's still, if you do get caught, then it just doesn't end well. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, so a big thing is that there is a lot of pressure to get in, It's like it's also like the Asian stereotypical that if you're not like a doctor, you're a failure. And another thing
Yeah.
with like, you said research that these professors do. Right now in higher education, there's a big thing about publishing. Like you have to publish so many papers, and it's more about quality or quantity versus quality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Gavin?
Um, I would say that, just in regards, can I kind of talk about like normal college versus Ivy
Yeah,
League?
you can talk about anything.
Okay. Um, and I don't know. What I was thinking about was the main point of Ivy Leagues is networking,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like it's pretty worth investing your undergrad in a much cheaper school, whether it's like a community college or your state college, honestly, because I feel like the graduates is where Ivy Leagues come in and actually are significant. I know that their ratio of graduate students to undergrad is pretty like high
Mm-hmm.
too.
Yeah, so the thing about undergrad versus grad, the main point that people make is that, like, for undergrad, most programs are like the same. You can get the same education at any college. The difference comes at, like, grad is like when you're doing research. You won't be doing, like, the same research at one school that you could do at the other. This could be, like, because of the resources the school have or, like, how their grad program is set up.
Yeah.
And the disproportional amount of like grad to undergrad, a cool statistic is that even though you might think like more undergrad students will be successful at an Ivy League versus a community college, actually more people that go to like a state college end up doing grad because it's maybe like the pressure of Ivy Leagues where if they feel like they don't do perfect in their undergrad, like why would they do graduate school even though they're still like a very exceptional student.
Yeah. And it is you could also make the point that if you're already accepted to like an Ivy League in your undergrad, then you're pretty much guaranteed to go into the grad for that said Ivy League.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know if it's guaranteed. I think it's just a higher chance.
Yes, I think it's higher chance, like, but a good amount of really higher chance.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, it is a really weird question where if you're not going into like a STEM, is it really worth going to like an Ivy League?
Yeah, because of course it could be more expensive. Like, say you're, maybe like high median where you won't get full aid. You'll get like some, but it'll still be like much more expensive. This
Oh,
the sweet
yeah.
spots are like if you're low income, you will most likely get most of your tuition paid, or if you're like median, but if you're like high, like low high income or like high medium, where you're making like your parents make like to combine like 150,000, that's a really good amount, but maybe they live in like California where like rent is very expensive and housing. So if you're spending like $60,000 and that's what they give you, is it worth 60,000 at an Ivy League versus like 30,000 at a state college?
Yeah. And that is a really good point. Because even just like looking like at like Colorado's colleges, you'll see like the kids from like out of state are paying literally like double
Mm-hmm.
our tuition.
Yeah, because the out of state versus in state is a very big difference, which
Yeah.
makes it kind of hard if you want to go out of state, but not impossible.
Yeah, it incentivizes against it though, I'd say.
Hmm. And on that, do you think it should be like that? Do you think the system should be set up where it favors in-state versus
Um,
out-of-state?
I think, yeah, I think that there should be something in place to where people get but not infinite, equal kind of tuition, and that it was more standardized.
Mhm.
But that could also be solved with like tax dollars going towards colleges to fund them, and then eliminating student loans and stuff.
Yeah, that's a very big portion. Like, should college be cheaper? Because in the United States, it is a lot more than every other part in the world. Like, almost nowhere comes close.
And yeah, I mean, free is definitely not necessary, but definitely not like 60 grand a year per person when you have 30,000 people.
Hmm. Is that kind of where you like draw the line at like $60,000 is like around that amount should be too much?
I think
Or
that
is there,
anything
like-
above 20 grand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. $80,000 for a degree is not cheap. Expensive, especially if you're not gonna make that ever.
Well, that kind of comes into my point of like, what's the point of going to an Ivy League if you're going into like a degree like teaching or like a music production degree? You know?
Yeah, because the main selling point is just networking, but there's certain cases where I think like if you're gonna be a teacher, does it really matter that much? Like if you're not going for a high income job, does it matter? And you're going more for an experience.
Yeah. Very expensive experience.
Very expensive. Yeah, is there anything else you want to add, Gavin? I think we covered a lot.
I think that was the majority of
Yeah,
kind of what we
I
wanted
think
to-
we went over everything. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
And okay, what is your name, Mr. Sir?
My name is Nick.
Nick. And how long have we known each other?
We have known each other for the better part of 12 years.
The better part of 12. One other guy named Cam that I interviewed said 13. You know, it's a long time. Yeah, so, as we are going to college soon, throughout the year, I've been looking into, like, some ethical issues pertaining to, like, the Ivy Leagues and things. So, I'm going to give you some questions, and you can give me some answers on, like, your thoughts and, what should be allowed. Okay, so I will start off with, the Ivy Leagues, It's very hard to get into, right? The average household income of a person who is admitted to the Ivy League, though, is $200,000. This is way over the median income of $70,000, and the top two-thirds of students come from the top 20% income, while the bottom 20% only make up 10% of Harvard. So, there's a lot of money in Harvard. They want this because they want to grow these massive endowment funds. Harvard has the biggest at $51 billion, and the combined is going to soon reach $200 billion within the next 5 years. So, question I have for you is, should the Ivy League be allowed to have these massive endowment funds?
honestly, when the idea of an endowment fund isn't the worst in the world, I don't think. But I think it is getting kind of ridiculous. I think you said something like 50 billion for one school
Mm-hmm.
alone. This money could easily be going to things that are far more useful. Um, I wouldn't say that it should be allowed, because obviously endowment funds can be beneficial. Um, but there should be some sort of regulation, some sort of cap, especially for the Ivy Leagues. The people going to Ivy Leagues, most of them already have money. You said two-thirds of students come from the top 20% of
Mm-hmm.
incomes in the United States. Like, they don't need this money. Um, this could, this should absolutely be put back into the community. Should go to much of it should go towards scholarships. I assume some of it does, um, since it's a private university. But yeah, I definitely think there should be restrictions. This kind of wealth hoarding is just creating even greater economic inequality, especially for people our age, who just want to go to a good college and get a good degree. Um, Although at some level, I will say, Ivy Leagues aren't necessarily required to get a good education. Um, so it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. I think it's fine if it keeps going on like this. But I think regulations on these sort of things to limit them, cap them at certain dollar amounts, and the rest has to go to charity or something, that would absolutely be beneficial.
Yeah, that's some good insight because the money is used to like, maybe build buildings, art galleries. It helps fund like low income students so they can get full ride. And of course there's like research. So I think like you were saying that like maybe like they should have a percent that should be guaranteed to go back into the college instead of like going back to like fund give it to the rich people. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, a lot of this money is going back to people who don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is very good that some of it goes towards low income students to make sure that they can also attend the Ivy Leagues, but I think a lot more of it needs to go to them.
Yeah, that is great. The second topic I want to go on is about enrollment and race. So you probably heard that the Ivy Leagues use race as a part of, the admissions process. And while they claim to have a diversity, it's not that much more diverse than the national average. If you look at the race groups, you can see that Asian Americans are much higher than average, but things like Hispanic and African American are actually lower than the national average. And why this is a problem is you probably heard of affirmative action. And this is an outcome of the Harvard versus students, where a case went to the Supreme Court that it showed data that Asian Americans should be enrolled at twice the higher rates. So the outcome was, I won't say the outcome, but basically the data showed that they should really have like double, even though it's already like 20% versus national average of like 10%, I think. The reason that they don't have more is that Asians were quoted as being boring and uninteresting, even though having much better extracurriculars and overall grades. So the outcome was that, the affirmative action, you probably heard about that. But what do you think the outcome should have been? Do you think that, the affirmative action should have been removed because this hurts marginalized groups, or should they have to let like more diverse groups in?
Well, I mean, I think the general idea of affirmative action is a good thing because, on the surface, you might be able to say, well, they should just let in by merit, which, at a surface level, just at a glance, sounds really good. It's like, yeah, just ignore everything except what they've achieved. But that also, but you look a little deeper and you're like, okay, well, have all of these people been afforded the same opportunities at success? And the answer is, quite frankly, it's no.
Yeah.
Especially people of color and Latino groups, they generally, as the national statistics can show, are part of lower income brackets, which means that they're part of school districts that aren't funded as well. So the quality of their education and the amount of extracurriculars that they have access to, and all of these things that affect your admissions process, They just don't have the opportunities. And so something really needs to be done to account for that, because there are plenty of amazing students who are from these lower income communities, who are racial minorities, who just, on paper, compared to maybe just a middle class white student like you or I, who attends a very well funded school district, one of the fastest growing in our state, on paper they might look like a lot worse of a student. But the fact is, we've just been afforded far more opportunities to show our excellence. To show that we're the cream of the crop, that we're good students that can make it into these Ivy Leagues. So I think affirmative action is actually a good idea. The problem is that these people, it kind of seems like they don't have any idea what they're doing. The vision is there, the idea of what the goal is clear. Create more diverse groups. But at the end of the day, the problem does not really lie in affirmative action. I think it's more in the fact that these Ivy Leagues aren't really accepting by merit in the first place, because that's really the kind of flawed thinking that this entire argument rests on. Should we do affirmative action or not? Well, the fact is they're letting in people who will give them more money.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact statistic, but it was some significant portion of Ivy League first-year students accepted this year were part of legacy families who had graduates from the same school who were actively contributing money back to the school and donating, I say with air quotes. They're just giving them money so that their kids can go there because they have the money to do so. And I think once people start to realize that these Ivy Leagues aren't really, especially the very top ones, aren't really based on merit, they're really just about the money, I think you'll see less of a push for affirmative action in these schools, because they'll lose a lot of that status of being an Ivy League. An Ivy League, currently it means you have to be really smart, you have to do really well, you're a high achiever, you're going places, you're going to change the world. But people need to realize that it's about the money. And there are people going to, our home college, CSU, its only notable program is that it's number 2 in the country for veterinary science. There are people going to this school that are just as bright as any kid at Harvard, but people won't recognize that because it's just some college town in Colorado, and not some big Ivy League, So yeah, I think I don't think this is a problem of affirmative action, but in the short run, I think it's a good idea to help, get more people access to it, especially if it starts to tip the balance of all the rich people getting in. If they can only let in a certain number of people each year, if they start letting in, specifically choosing to let in more minority groups, that's just a good thing. But there'll always be people who complain. It should be based on merit. But of course they just gotta look at the bigger picture. Merit isn't everything. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. There's no really win-win here. It's kind of just both sides loses. It's like big on policy, where policy, you got to choose like which group you want to hurt more. So there's no really win. You touched on legacy emissions. That's also a big controversial thing, where that should be allowed, because people with legacy get admitted at higher rates even though they might not be a better student. And the fact that a big thing that I have done in research is realize that while Ivy Leagues are great, maybe sometimes it's better to go to a college that is good in one field, like veterinary science, that's not the best university, but they're really good at this one particular subject. So that's some good insight. The last thing I have related to Ivy Leagues is academic fraud. So back last year, the Stanford president was accused of committing academic fraud. No one really checked his research. The data was fabricated, and this was because he's hold just such a high-level power-ranking position that it's oh yeah, he's such a great guy, president, he wouldn't fake the data. But that is exactly what happened. this is bad, and he got fired. Also, the Harvard president, so it's Harvard president, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT gave controversial congressional hearings with unfavorable opinions, like calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment. The Harvard president responded, well, it depends on the context. People saw this as really bad, so she was forced to resign and step down. The question I have for you is, what ethical considerations should be taken into account when responding to these and making an action when choosing to falsificate data when it will probably get you in trouble if found out?
I mean, when you think about it, if the president of Stanford was fabricating data, it's got to be much more widespread than it was. Because if all you have to do is be notable to fake your data, no one's going to check it. I mean, think about how many. You only have to do 1 or 2 good papers before you establish yourself as a qualified researcher, especially if you're at a prestigious Ivy League university. There are definitely people at these places that feel very strongly about this, that care about the integrity of the research community. And I think, honestly, what I would expect to happen, the outcome that I think is most likely to happen, I'm kind of surprised it hasn't happened yet, is there to be a more specialized board of people who come from different Ivy Leagues and whatever, and different big research schools, to come together and review specifically higher level works of established people, fact check them, go through stuff that's already been published, and see how deep this runs. Maybe even conduct some research on the research to see what happens. And you mentioned something about the was it at Harvard about genocide of Jews or something? Could you repeat that part for me?
Yeah, so the Harvard president, she gave congressional hearings. There's other schools as well, but the main thing that caused for controversy was when asked, calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment, that she responded, well, it depends on the context, and people were upset because this was not a very favorable answer.
Yeah, in that case specifically, I think, it's a very polarizing topic. It's very easy to not want to take a side. The Harvard president very likely did not want to comment on this or be in the spotlight on this. And, you throw out a neutral answer, but of course, when it's something this serious, a neutral answer is going to look like a bad one. And honestly, I don't think in this case that her intentions were bad or anything. I think she just wanted to avoid it, move on. Calls into question, should the president of Harvard be acting this way? I think is a whole nother story. But yeah, I think I think it might be a little hasty of some of these people to assume that this is indicative of any anti-Semitic rhetoric. Saying my personal take on this is I don't think there's any place for that sort of language outside of satire. Which, if that's what she was referring to, probably would have clarified. So I can see where one might think, oh, this is a terrible response, But I'd like to, maybe give her a little benefit of the doubt. Just be put on the spot for something she wasn't prepared for, and gave a quick answer that didn't really fit the bill. Given more time, probably would have said something better. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, because you have to kind of give a quick answer, so, could have been something she didn't plan out or said. But that is all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for taking the time on the interview.
Who do we got here? Applicant test subject number 1. What's your name?
Megatron.
So, Megatron, we've known each other for many years, 10 years plus, right?
2 months, maybe? Yeah.
Not 2 months, many years. So I have some questions related to the Ivy Leagues because there is some injustice at the Ivy Leagues. I know. What a shocker. So the first thing I have is, how do you feel that basically most people that get into the Ivy Leagues, the 2/3 of students come from the top 20% of income? Like, this is kind of unfair. The average income is $200,000.
I don't know how to justify that.
Right, and there is no way to justify because the money they need goes into the endowment funds,
Wow.
which are billions of dollars, like almost $200 billion. Isn't that crazy?
That is pretty crazy.
I mean, a billion's already kind of unfathomable, but like that much? So another thing I have is that the Ivy Leagues, they use like diversity as a hiring thing, right?
Of course.
You've heard about that, but it's not really that diverse. The only thing they hire is really just kind of more Asians, right?
I mean, yeah.
And this is bad because there was a lawsuit against Harvard Students for Fair Admissions where it was found out that Asians should be admitted at twice the rate, but it was, quote, they were found to be boring. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have many words for that. It just seems kind of unjust.
Yep, very unjust. They are kind of being racist against Asians, even though they are scoring higher and should be admitted at a higher rates. You know, that's very bad. But one thing is that they use a selling point for race is the affirmative action. You've heard about that?
No. Can you explain?
So affirmative action is basically that you can use race as a selling point for university, but it's not allowed in all states. It's banned in big ones like California and Florida. And it's kind of a hard area because on one hand, the Ivy Leagues love to use diversity, even though it's not that diverse, but it would also hurt minority groups where if it was banned, you know, there's no clear solution for this. You know, so it's kind of stuck in the middle.
Could be a predicament, you know.
Right, it's a problem. There's no winning. And the last thing I want to touch on is that the, you know, kind of like the leaders at Harvard, some like presidents. I need to find this. I think I would be more organized, right? No, of course not. Academic fraud, right? Last year, the Stanford president was accused of committing academic fraud. Now, this happened because he has such a high position that no one really challenged him, you know?
Of course.
Which makes sense, but his data was fabricated. And then when they found out, he was fired.
Okay, well, at least they did that.
Right. But this is not even the worst. You have the Harvard president, University of Pennsylvania, MIT gave a congressional hearing that had unfavorable opinions, like calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment. And to that question, they responded with, well, it depends on the content. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know about that. That might not have been the right response.
Right. Like, you don't want to lie under oath, but you don't want to say that. Because I don't even know how they came up with that. That's just kind of crazy. You think someone so high up in like academia would be a bit smarter.
They ask like ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's yeah, it seems like they put in the ChatGPT gone rogue. Well, thank you so much for your time. What was your name again?
Megatron.
Megatron. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gabe.